really attuned to our media ecosystem and where and how we get our information, the siloed information that we often receive, the buckets that we sit in, and then it's the challenges that we have within our media ecosystem because that bias exists everywhere. And so I'm really excited for our next keynote speaker. She'll have a presentation from her, and then we'll have a fireside chat again and be able to work in your questions. But let me read her bio. And I'll have to say, I think I've told her this. She has been on my radar since I learned about this media bias chart years ago. And I've been kind of keeping her in her pocket. I was like, I gotta get her in to speak and talk about this. And I'm really excited to have her here today. She has built a tool that millions of people now use to do exactly that, what I was talking about, understanding bias in the media. But Vanessa Otero created the media bias chart in 2016. It quickly became one of the most widely referenced resources for understanding news reliability and bias. She went on to found Adfonts Media, a company dedicated to rating news with vigor and precision. A former patent attorney who knows a thing or two about systems and standards, Vanessa is going to walk us through how we can measure media bias, what this means for science communication, and how we can all become a little bit smarter consumers of information. And obviously, we hope you'll get a chance to check this out online as well. Let me welcome and introduce Vanessa to the stage.
Hi, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. I live just in the Denver suburbs, so it's a real treat for me to be here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I love this place. I'm also a bit of a walker, and we're just going to dive right into it. I'll specifically talk about, obviously there's bias in the media. This is not a surprise to anyone, but we're going to get into some details, the nitty-gritty about it. Specifically talking about the fragmented, polarized, very full media landscape and how it specifically affects science communication. How many people have seen some version of this media bias chart floating on the internet in the last few years? All right, great. So it's usually a third to half of the audience, and a lot of people have seen this. Most people do not know that there's a company behind it. Our company, Adfontes Media, is who creates this, and we put out multiple versions every single month, actually. So whatever you've seen before, you've probably seen several iterations. And if you've seen it or shared it, you've also likely quibbled with some of the placements of your favorite and least favorite outlets on there. So I love talking about that. I will get into it as deep as you want to go. So we're going to get pretty deep here. We're going to start with the taxonomy. And I have a feeling this is an audience that digs taxonomies and methodologies. My people, all right. And it's a blank chart, so you don't get distracted by all the things. Because the taxonomy is really foundational. This is a taxonomy, and then there's a methodology for placing news sources and news content within this taxonomy. So I know this is about as big as you can get the chart on the screen, and it's still some small words that might make you feel a little aged. It certainly does for me because of small writing, but I'll explain what everything is. Generally, people have a sense intuitively when they see it first. Top is good, middle is okay, and down is bad, and that's directionally correct. But this is two axes. This one is overall reliability, and this one is left to right bias. So let's take one at a time. Overall reliability. What we mean is, what can you rely on for news to be truthfully, factually, thoroughly informed about things that are new and important to you and others, is our general definition of that. And there's 8 categories. Why 8? Well, in looking at the media landscape, what actually exists out there is not as simple as news versus opinion. Media discussion and criticism has been somewhat binary like that, or real news versus fake news, but it's much more of a gradient. So in these 8 categories, what's at the very top, in these top 3 sections, above this green line generally, is the work journalists do. So at the very apex is original fact reporting that's high effort. Below that is thorough fact reporting and fact-dense analysis, and below that is mix of fact reporting or simple fact reporting. So all of those things can be highly reliable. And simple fact reporting, just think of a very, very simple local news story, and your original fact reporting, high effort, way at the very top, like a long, investigative, deep, took a lot of work, fact reporting type of story. And then below that, you've got analysis and opinion. Now, there's nothing wrong with analysis and opinion, but we just want to differentiate it. We want to differentiate it from news. And the reason we are valuing in this system, this is a taxonomy, so you have to make definitions and make choices here. In the system, the reason we put the work of journalists at the top is because the rest of the ecosystem wouldn't exist without it. So we have a ton of content in our media ecosystem that's analysis and opinion. Just think about all the podcasts and all the blogs and all the cable TV shows. And they wouldn't even exist if they didn't have the news to talk about in the first place, the original fact reporting. So that's why we really value that. We put that at the top. And so again, nothing wrong with opinion or analysis, but it's just different from news. Then there's stuff that says, well, it's just an opinion, but it's something worse than that. And this little orange section, we call this our problematic section. So it can be problematic for a lot of ways. It might be opinion, yes, but maybe it's really selective or incomplete, such that it changes the meaning of actual facts. Maybe it is not just opinionated, but it uses dehumanizing and vilifying language or mean insults to just derail the discourse. That's what we put in this section, and unfortunately, there is a lot of that content in our media ecosystem as well. And then below that, there's contains misleading info and contains inaccurate and fabricated info. And we purposely avoid the terms misinformation and disinformation because they are so politicized and co-opted and have been for a long time. So the practice I like to embrace is if there's ever a term that becomes politicized, co-opted, or people don't share the meaning of it very widely, just to change and use a more precise term. So when we're saying this contains misleading information, that's something we've cited that we can say it is this sentence, it is this statement that we're saying is misleading or inaccurate. Then we've got bias. And I wish there was a better word for bias, because I don't necessarily mean bias is a bad thing all the time. It's just a shorthand. I actually did not name this the media bias chart. The public named it the media bias chart. I was like, look at my news quality infographic, and they're like, media bias chart, and that's the name. So, so I had to get that domain name and redirect it to a site. So it's because people like to talk about the bias, but on this left-right spectrum, when we say bias, we don't just mean prejudice. You can have a preconceived notion, something that's making you like in physics, bias to one side or another. We're also talking just about the leftness or rightness of a thing or a political position. So when we have this left-right axis, and I want to say a few things about that, because this is a pretty politically astute audience. Some of you in the audience right now are like, well, you can't just measure politics on a simple left-right axis anymore. It just doesn't apply. Okay, so bear with me here. I know I caught some of you. All right, we're saying it's a left-right axis. And so we're not saying it's a left-right binary, like is either left or is either right. The way we talk about left-right, it's a mental model. It's a mental framework that's easy for a lot of people, whether they're politically astute or not, to grasp. And you can tell that it's a gradient in reality because of how we talk about it. We say things like center right, far right, MAGA, alt right, neoliberal, liberal, progressive, far left, socialist. Like we have all these different terms, and those are like relative gradients of that range. So that's one thing. And it's left right, not like conservative, liberal, or Democrat, Republican, just because it encompasses broader ideas, like as many political types and typologies as you can. We're also not saying that the middle is best. Middle is just middle. So up is good, down is bad. Middle, you can be in the middle for a few reasons. So middle could mean centrist, and centrist is a political position, isn't it? You can have a centrist bias. It can be in the middle also if it's a balance of biases, even if it's like a false balance. Or if you have far left and far right arguers on a podcast, that would shake out to the middle, but that's not necessarily reliable, right? There's another reason something can be in the middle, and it's because it's minimally biased. And so that does correlate very closely with highly reliable. If somebody's trying to give you facts as straightforwardly as possible with minimal bias, that will tend to be in the middle and also towards the top. So we've got, and also this changes over time. This shifts. What's left and right shifts, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little, much like the Overton window. And we may not like that, but it happens across, it happens on each side in each segment and over time. So for example, in 1964, the political position of segregation should be legal would be occupied by most of the right side in 1964. Today, that would be a very, very, very far right position. In 2008, the position same-sex marriage should be legal would have been like a hyper-partisan left position, but today it's more of a middle-ish position. Immigration, like the really harsh immigration enforcement, has moved. That's moved to be more of a broader encompassing right position in just the last 12 months, even. So this shifts really quickly. And so we're not trying to say what we think left and right should be. We're just trying to say what it is today and what is immediate in relation to it. Because in any time period, there's a finite number. It doesn't seem like finite. It seems infinite. How many news sources there are. There's something that's the furthest right over here. And there's something that's the furthest left over here. And everything is going to be relatively within those. So that's what we're trying to measure here. All right, so there are thousands and thousands of news and news-like sources out there. This is a screenshot of our interactive media bias chart, the fanciest version, and it's showing about 1,500 logos. There's so many you can't even see them. So that's why we do the little curated image that circulates. So what we mean by news and news-like sources is we rate any kind of content where people get their information. Information to make decisions about their civic or their personal lives. So do people get information from podcasts on whether to take vaccines? Yes, they do. So we rate that kind of stuff. All right, how do we rate this? All right, so I'm gonna give you an example going through various news sources. And you can actually do this on our interactive chart. You can search for any news source, or you can download our mobile app. It takes a lot of data, so like do it outside or on your Wi-Fi. But you can look for any of the 4,000 news sources that we display on here. It's about 4,500 now. So Reuters is in the middle. It's in this mix. It's fact reporting and analysis. Is in this green box. Highly reliable news source. So how do we determine that Reuters lands there? Well, this is a scatter plot of a representative sample of articles that we have rated from Reuters to come up with this determination. So each of those dots, it doesn't look like all that many dots, but it's approximately 400. These are like a dot right here represent an article that our analysts have determined is minimally biased, and it scores that fact reporting score. So who are our analysts? We have a team of analysts that are employees of Ad Fontes Media. They're spread around the country, and they are left, right, and center. It's really important that for our methodology, what we're doing is analyzing content. We're using a rubric. We're breaking down various things we're looking for overall reliability and left to right political bias and grading them very slowly. It's a very time-consuming, laborious process to do this because each article is looked at by 3 people. It's a panel of 1 left, 1 right, and 1 center person. So they'll score it on their own, they will look at each other's scores, discuss any discrepancies, and they'll move to a next one. So we do this in shifts all day, every day, 2 hours at a time. We have multiple shifts going on most of the day. And we've done this for over 100,000 pieces of content manually. We've been doing this for about 7 years. So we have a lot of data on representative samples of news sources. So you'll see Reuters like very high up, very middle, some really great originally reported content, but no outlet is perfect. So even good outlets tend to have outliers down here. And what those usually are for an outlet like this is something that's been corrected or retracted. So it gets some credit for being corrected or retracted. If you take a look at the Wall Street Journal, that scatter plot looks like this because it's a lot of fact reporting articles, a lot of right-leaning opinion and analysis. If you look at CNN, there's two separate logos, one for web and one for the TV network. So TV, this is very similar when you look at Fox News or MSNBC or anything that has both an online property and a cable TV property. The cable property is typically more opinionated and more biased just because of the format. So if you think about this is made up of all the various different TV shows. So this is all CNN's articles. CNN TV network would be made up of all the different news shows throughout the day, and they have individual ratings. And when you think about watching cable news, usually earlier in the day they have news hours. They have more stories. They might have 10 to 12 stories, and it's more of like straightforward reporting. And then sometime mid-afternoon they shift to panel discussion format, where they'll typically cover about 4 stories with up to 35, I'm not exaggerating, 35 pundits. So they'll have panels of like 6 people at a time, and you watch that and you're like, yeah, I'm informed with the news, but not really. You heard 4 stories and are all about domestic politics, and you heard a lot of people's analysis and opinions of them. So we do this so folks can just differentiate. Folks will ask us on something like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, oh, well, don't you differentiate between opinion and news? Those are totally different things. And they are, but it's actually not that common for news outlets to make that distinction anymore. There are more news and news-like sources that do not label news and opinion than ones that do. And if you are younger millennial and younger than that, you might not have ever experienced a paper where seriously, in your household, where they labeled like this a physical section that is supposed to be news and a separated off section that's supposed to be opinion. How you consume it is in a vertical scroll, one article at a time. And that makes it difficult for, like, imagine when Facebook put news in their feed, a news card, just think in your mind what a social media news card looks like. You are calling that to mind. It's a graphic, it's the headline, it's the logo of the outlet, and one from AP News can be right next to one from Daily Beast, and there's no differentiation. If you've never experienced a newspaper, or you've never seen oh, this is a New York Times opinion versus a New York Times fact reporting story, then you're much less likely to make that distinction. So a lot of folks don't. We make that distinction on whether it's news or opinion, regardless of whether it's labeled or not. All right, so I like to pull up a couple of these examples. Here's one that's a little lower reliability to the right. It's called Daily Wire, and this is in a section called opinion or wide variation in reliability, and then there's above that analysis or wide variation in reliability. It's a little confusing, but this source is one that's wide variation in reliability. So there's news articles that are not very biased, but and highly reliable, and then there's ones that are selective, incomplete, misleading, inaccurate, that are they're much more to the right. And then you've got Daily Beast on the left. So I like to pull up these examples because people on the left tend to really like the Daily Beast and hate the Daily Wire. And people on the right tend to really like the Daily Wire and hate the Daily Beast. And you know what folks who read the Daily Wire say? They're like, this is a fine news source. It has news. I'm informed. And they are correct. And then people who watch or read the Daily Beast, they say, no. Daily Wire is full of propaganda, and it's very hyperpartisan right, and they are also correct, because it's a wide variation in reliability. But it's the same thing for the Daily Beast, vice versa. So we usually don't have a very good idea of the sample of news we hate. we have a caricature of it. Like most people on the right experience HuffPost through Ben Shapiro, and most people on the left experience Fox News through John Oliver, like somebody on your own side. So you usually only see the worst parts of it and can't understand why anybody would possibly, in their right mind, watch that other thing. All right, so let's talk about science news, because there's news. We have these tagged by various categories, and this is not every like science. These are not like strictly science things, but when the news content, when they talk about if it's one of their focus areas, we'll include it in here. So there's a big concentration in here. There's a ton of science news publications in here, and then there's ones that are a little bit to the left, ones that are just like weird one-offs, and then there's quite a few that are that occupy this lower right space. We'll explore that a little bit more, and then when you get into health news, similar. There's a lot of really highly reliable stuff, but then there's stuff that's way out. So I'm gonna pick on a couple. And just in the science realm, just to illustrate some things. So I actually picked on some outlets that I know are here today. So Science Magazine, but good job, because highly reliable, minimally biased, not to be left out. Nature, and don't make too much out of like how far away they are in the top box. Like these are all very wonderful, excellent, great journalism, guys. Tell your newsrooms you should be very proud of this. Highly reliable news outlets. For comparison, I don't think this outlet is here, but Stat News. Great outlet. I think we have some non-science media in the room as well, like Colorado Public Radio. It's a tiny little logo, and also Axios. Didn't want to leave you guys out there, but yeah, highly reliable news publications. But that's not uniform across. Not all science news publications are like that. So if you take a look at Scientific American, they tend to have more opinion and advocacy, expressly advocacy pieces. Again, is not anything wrong with advocacy and opinion? No, just that influences its perception of bias and the percentage of what it offers to its audience. So I wish it was all like in the section, but there's very influential parts of the media ecosystem that are not here. Like, what is this? Climate Depot? Probably none of you here have been to climatedepot.com. For your sanity, I would recommend not going there. So yeah, and it's a website, and when you go to it, it's sort of hard to believe that other people go to that website. And you might want to, because you probably have never heard of it, and if you're a climate scientist, like your jaw will drop. That it's just every single thing that has possibly been debunked about the field is just written about like every day here. Like, how many people can possibly go to that site? Is it really that influential in the discourse? Well, a website, not necessarily, but a website's just like a home base for the content on the internet. That gets out to YouTube and TikTok, and people link to it, and then they make up their own stuff on Twitter or Facebook. Like it's just a seed, but it exists as a seed, as a website. And there's other sites that you may never have been to either, but are massively influential in the discourse. This one is Children's Health Defense Network. So who knows who the founder of Children's Health Defense is? RFK Jr., our Secretary of Health and Human Services. All right, so not a reliable news source. And if you when you fill out this chart, there's a bunch of stuff that, like in the corners here. And if I were in charge, I would not take the leaders of the outlets in either of the corners and put them in leadership positions in the government. But I am not in charge, so that's where we are. So what do we do about that? All right, so it's not just websites. There are news influencers. There are so news influencers take the form of, like I said, any news or news-like content, YouTube, TikTok, podcasts, and there are good ones, and there are okay ones, and there are not so good ones. The size of an outlet doesn't matter anymore. There are great Substack writers that we've got that you could consider news influencers, great sources of information, highly reliable, minimally biased. All we care about here is rating the actual quality of the content. So you can get good news from newer types of media. Doesn't matter how old it is, doesn't matter how big it is. Just matters whether it's highly reliable, minimally biased. So you've got some podcasts. We've got Unbiased Politics. Sharon Says So. We got Hugh Hewitt over here, Kara Swisher, as Lex Friedman, Theo Vaughn. Donald Trump appeared on his podcast. Pod Save America over here. And then let's take this is Candace Owens, and Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is the most popular podcast in the world. So our poor analysts, have listened to a lot of Joe Rogan. Because look at all these dots, each one 3 hours of the man and his guests talking about whatever they talk about. And sometimes it's highly reliable. It's just an author talking about beekeeping or something. And sometimes it's Bernie Sanders, when talking about policy. But sometimes it's Alex Jones. And so in a podcast, especially Joe Rogan, like 90% sometimes of the podcast is the guest. So the guest is the content. So we're rating the quality of that content. All right, so there's a lot of news influencers out there. This is about 600 or so of them. So what does that mean for us? So let's talk about polarization in news media and across society. As our distinguished panelists earlier talked about before, Tony and Seth, lots of things are politicized. And it's not just because of the media. They talked about the many, many reasons we are polarized as a society, but we're polarized on most issues, including all the ones related to science and health. And I think it's a coping mechanism. It's a function of the fact that there are so many news sources. Because there's so much information, many people make decisions based on teams rather than even values or case-by-case facts. It's a coping mechanism because this is a relatively new phenomenon to have tens of thousands of information sources. This really started proliferating in 2010 when when social media got really good on smartphones, and the ease of producing user-generated content just got a lot easier and more proliferation. So I think it was Tony who said this, people trust, even if they don't trust something, they do trust something else. So they have to figure out how to trust stuff. So people make decisions in this way, including your stakeholders, current and prospective colleagues, employees, funders, elected officials, and the voting public. And I always like to talk about politics, talk about the elephant in the room, and recognize where polarization creates issues and address it head on. Now, I say ignoring it and trying to be apolitical doesn't work. I don't think this is a crowd that's like all about ignoring politics. Like we're elbow deep in it. It's like roll up your sleeves, we're gonna talk about it. So good. You guys didn't need that tip. But it is also critical to recognize where polarization creates organizational blind spots. And again, as Seth and Tony and others have referred to earlier, fields get polarized. Like we will segregate ourselves. So journalism, academia, and science tend to be more left-leaning fields. And obviously not 100%, but you have other fields that are right-leaning, like finance, oil and gas, agriculture. And each of those fields in and of themselves are very powerful sections of society. And but it's important to recognize that if your field is even 60-40, one side or the other, it's going to make it harder for the minority voices to speak up and feel comfortable, and then it can lead to blind spots. So 2 main challenges for science communication in this environment. 1 is reaching audiences, and 2 is having effective influence. We all want to talk about what actually works here. So reaching audiences. Because everything's so fragmented, knowing that the audience now exists in tens of thousands of places, if you're a science communicator and you need to get a message out to various constituencies, it has to be in a lot of different places. You have to be where people are, and those can be very niche places. And reaching folks across a fragmented environment requires new platforms and multiple formats. This is a whole lot of work, and it's like really frustrating because look, my preferred way of communicating with people is writing 500 to 2,000 words. I like to read, I like to write. That's not everybody's jam. They didn't like to read my methodology or my blog posts about the news, but you know what they did like? The infographic. everybody shared that dang infographic. So one of the things I had to learn was like, you have to put in all the formats for all the learners and all the people and all the places. So we have the chart and we have an interactive chart, and I have my long blog posts, and I have the 3-minute videos for Instagram, and I have the 30-minute videos for YouTube. And if you want to get your message out to everyone, that's unfortunately the way you got to do it. And last point on effective influence. How do you use this information about polarization for your benefit? Well, one, when talking to individuals, understanding what news sources they consume in the first place is going to be really key to even determining, is it worth your time to be talking to these folks? Human attention is finite. There's 10,000 news sources. Each of us has time for maybe 3 to 5, and they are all very similar to each other. So if somebody's consuming a very different 3 to 5 news sources than you, just keep that in mind when you're talking to them. If you are interacting with the press, I highly recommend understanding ones that might have a negative bias towards your institution, and especially recommend talking to them. Like, make sure you talk to media that is not partisan media aligned with your side. Get your message out. Different messages are effective for different political audiences, and recognizing how differently partisan media already talks about your issue can help you understand how your messages may be perceived. So rather than you getting a filter of like what the other side's message looks like, this is where the blind spots can kick in. If you are in it all like a mostly left-leaning organization and you're brainstorming with your friends in that organization, how do we reach right-leaning folks? And you're only talking to yourselves, you're going to be wrong about how to reach folks who disagree with you. So researching the other side's media is critical. Not like, oh, everyone should just see what the other side has to say and see if we can all get along. No, you want to research it so you understand what is there so you can be effective as a scientist and a policymaker. And with that, I'm going to have Max come up and chat with me, and we'll take some questions. All right, all right. Oh, the slide isn't up, the Slido. I know, just get ready to type your questions real quick. We got to roll out some chairs. And, all right. Okay.
You want a table and water?
Oh, that'd be great. Great. Well, thank you so much for a really thought-provoking and important talk. I think there's a Slido code up there now, so if you haven't already, send us your questions. While you do, I'm going to ask you a few to get us started. So you say that reliability and left-to-right bias are both independent variables. Can you say a little more about what that means and why it's so important?
Yes. One reason is like for the scientists in the room who saw that curve and were like, ah, normal distribution. That's not what this is. Okay. So it's these are two. This looks like there's a bell curve. It's normal distribution. No, that's not what it is. These are this would look different if we just chose different axes. So it's that taxonomy really matters. They're related. I mean, they're not reliability and bias have correlations at certain spots. But what I mean is that something it can have a left perspective or a right perspective. It can have a topic that's of interest to more one side or the other more. It can even make arguments in better, more reliable, or less reliable ways. Like you can have, so if you look at the chart and I focus on the skews left, skews right columns, there's good stuff and there's not so good stuff in the same horizontal frame. So there just is a very high correlation when it's very biased and very one-sided. It's highly correlated with low reliability.
Okay, great. We got a few questions in Slido about your fact checkers. What are your analysts looking for when they make their assessment of content? Are they looking at specific words, overall themes? Someone asked, who fact checks the fact checkers?
Yes, anyone can if you want to. It's just a lot of work. There's a lot of work for us to rate the media. So if somebody wants to go and rate us, the media raters, then they can. So our rubric, I could nerd out on the methodology stuff like I could talk about this for 8 hours, but it's not the symposium of me. So like, I'm happy to talk about any like really granular questions on the methodology. I'll be here all afternoon at the reception. But generally, when we have these sub-factors, it's content analysis, it's rhetorical analysis. I was an English major and a lawyer, and so I really care about like what the words are doing in the sentence. So when you're looking for reliability, there's 3 main sub-factors, and then we have a few other like secondary and tertiary factors, but mostly it's 1, expression as fact, analysis, or opinion. And we do that on a sliding scale of 1 to 5. So 1 fact reporting, a fact being 1, and fact and analysis, opinion. And then secondarily, there's veracity. So the reason we have both of those is because usually you have a fact statement and the fact statement is true. Sometimes you have a fact statement and the fact statement is false. So it's expressed as a fact, but the veracity is false. Sometimes it's expressed as an opinion, and then usually the veracity of that is neither true nor false, or it's unproven. So breaking it out and making it, slowing down your thinking is really critical to get people to come to an agreement on like what a rubric means. So the third thing we're looking is for like the matching of the headline and the images to and whether those are fair and relevant and timely and things like that. And then when we're talking about bias, there's a few, and left to rightness. The sub-factors are 1, language. Language also has to do with reliability, but when we talk about language in a political position framework, it's language characterizing issues or opponents, like the terminology preferred by one side or the other about an issue, or just the adjectives that are used to describe a political opponent. Then we'll talk about political position and advocacy thereof. So you could talk about a tax bill and just say what it is, or you can talk about that same tax bill and advocate for it, why it's good. And then a comparison. So comparison takes into account not just comparison to other reporting on the topic, but comparison to other reporting generally. And it takes into account things like topic selection and omission. So there's many things to look for in these. So we try to break it down to the most common component parts and think about each one individually.
Which is more challenging, the reliability or the bias to measure?
Bias. And it's harder to quantify, and it's because the entire like evaluation process, where we know we're trying to objectively measure an inherently subjective thing. There's a subjectivity that goes into the writing process, and when you're reading it, they're humans reading it, so there's subjectivity from both the writer and the multiple readers. So reliability, you can generally get to agreement on like if this term was misleading or is inaccurate, or is misleading or is merely selective. But it's harder to say how far right is this right now in this moment, because it shifts so quickly. And there's things that we anchor what's left and right in the country through a couple of things. One is current positions of elected officials, and like public polling on particular issues, but those again change very quickly. So when you're trying to say like what do most Republicans or most Democrats think about that, so what we try to do first is like, all right, we can generally bucket it left or right, and then we'll have to make arguments for like how far, what words make it more towards the middle, more towards the extremes.
Another question from the audience. Do you track the evolution of bias over time? If so, what trends have you seen over the years you've been doing this work?
We do, and it's like our number one most requested feature on the chart is to be able to search this, and we are developing it right now. It's just technologically and logistically difficult because of the sample size of each one, and that is something that people ask us for a lot, though. We usually only see a change to the overall sources score significantly when there is an editorial or leadership change that's purposeful. So with CNN, it usually doesn't happen because of the political environment. So for example, if you have a middle of the road, like say NBC News or like your local news station, there are subtle things that, because of how politics are now, like people are a little more scared to say DEI. It's just a thing. News reporters are sensitive to, like, if they say that word, they might be perceived, the acronym, they might be perceived as bias. So it's like a real subtle thing, but they're trying as a news organization to do the same thing they've been doing for a long time, which is be in the middle. So when they're trying to do that, they will usually say that. But notice CNN. They made some editorial changes a few years ago, or over the last few years. So on cable news, they got rid of some of their more partisan, opinionated commentators, like Don Lemon. He doesn't have a show there anymore. Chris Cuomo doesn't have a show there anymore. So those more opinionated types of shows, taking them out of the mix, made CNN shift over a little bit more towards the middle. They also stopped publishing opinion content on their website. They still publish left-leaning analysis content that it's like fairly opinionated, but that again made CNN shift over. Like CBS right now is going through a lot of editorial and leadership changes, like even heavy-handed ones right now. And that so the second we put out this chart, they're like, "You need to move CBS down and to the right." We got a lot of those comments, but like will it change? Probably. Like, it's probably going to move over time. But think about all the things CBS is. So you have CBS is 60 Minutes. It's evening news. It's podcasts and the website. And it's not like everybody got fired from CBS overnight. Like some of the stuff was changed. Like the hosts of CBS Evening News were changed, and so we're going to track that over time. Like Barry Weiss held up the Inside CCOT story, but it still was published, and it was still like that same piece of journalism, very different from the first one to the second one. It was a highly reliable piece of journalism. So it's not, we don't take an external factor, like external leadership change, and then just pick up the logo and move it a few squares. Like, Stephen Colbert canceled. Move. Barry Weiss is hired. Move it more. Like where? To what square? Like which direction and how much? So we try to just measure it rather than approach it the way that most people approach media criticism, which is ad hoc. Look at this bad example. That means all the media is this.
Great. We got some questions in Slido about social media, about the echo chambers we often find ourselves in, about the TikTok algorithm. We've been hearing for years, even decades, about how increasingly siloed we are and how we're all living in our own media landscape. I'm wondering if you see any bright spots in the media landscape or any examples of how we might get ourselves out of this morass?
Yes, so let me try to leave you with some optimism. It's been hard in the last, I created this first chart 9 years ago. I feel like things have gotten a lot worse, unfortunately. Like, it hasn't, we haven't fixed it. Still bad. But there are things that do give me hope. I think there's a little bit more algorithmic literacy, like digital literacy. There's awareness, at least, that one of the major drivers of our silos and polarization is the social media functions, like the YouTube functions, all the other Facebook and Meta platforms. There's this at least awareness, not among everyone, but even more among young people, and you're starting to see movements that are backlash. So I think this is reflected in current AI backlash. There's there's a lot of division on whether generative AI is ultimately good or bad, and I think, like most things are neither all good nor all bad. But you see large factions of just real resistance to AI, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we've seen techno optimism and like big technological changes in the form of social media. And we have 15 years of experience to look back at it and to see, like, that really messed a lot of stuff up. Like, let's not just hand over everything to like the next technology, which seems even more difficult to control. So when you see movements of people trying to get back to like touching grass and talking to people and getting dumb phones instead of smartphones, that is what gives me hope.
Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for helping us all understand media bias better. I do want to let everyone know that if you stay for our reception, we will have a touch screen out there where you can interact with the media bias chart yourself and perhaps ask Vanessa some more questions. So please join me in thanking Vanessa Otero.